Keeping manners as always. This is session is being recorded, but not capturing voices or images. However, if you participate through either the questions or the chatting, that can get captured. So just keep that in mind, and you can always share directly with the host or with myself if you don't want it to go out to everyone. And speaking of chat versus the Q&A, just to clarify, the chat you should use if you're having any technical difficulties, and the Q&A, and then we're also going to do a couple of quick exercises, and that will go into the chat section. And then actual questions you have, you can enter them in the Q&A section anywhere along the way, and I will address them at the end. I won't be looking at them as we go through. But I wanted to introduce by name my alumni relations counterpart, Lacey Beck. She's remaining hidden, but she's our co-host, and I just wanted to thank her in general for her support of this, and also let you know that she's monitoring the chat and the Q&A and can help with any technical issues as mentioned. And then the last thing I want to mention, I've actually had appointments with a couple of people who've been participating and gotten some other feedback, which I appreciate. And one of our participants reminded me that I should say that if you are currently unemployed, that and if you're in a state or location that requires you to prove job searching activities each week or every other week or however it works, that this counts. Participating in these webinar sessions counts as an activity. So in case any of you had not thought of that, just wanted to let you know that. So let's get started. Here's our summer colloquium holding page, just to remind you that this series is part of our overall summer offerings. And so definitely take a look at that website if you haven't, and see what else might be appealing to you and open to you. And just wanted to give a quick report that we're really pleased with the results so far. This is the third week in, and we have, I believe, close to 1,300 registrants, students, and alumni across the various programs. And we've been really excited that this seems to be fulfilling a need or the goal that we set out, which is to provide some intense programming during this moment of people, either being unemployed or internships canceled or jobs postponed for some of our seniors, that we can fill a little bit of that void with some materials and some presentations to help you all as you think about next steps and take practical steps towards what's happening. I added back a mental health slide. In my office, I have two paintings by my uncle, both of which depict roads and shade and sunlight. And so when I was looking for images, I was thinking about happy places for me. And I actually miss my office. I miss those paintings. But here's an image. I'm going to take a second to take a deep breath, think about nature, think about wide open spaces. And one of the reasons I love those paintings is I like that imagery of a road, sometimes straight, sometimes curvy, sometimes it's going through obstacles, etc. But I think it's, a perhaps obvious but nice analogy for career paths and next steps and all of that good stuff. So remember, in the midst of all you're doing and everything you're handling, to take the time to be outside or look at outside or go to your happy place or whatever works for you. But back to our path for today, which is cover letters. And as I mentioned last week, the three sessions, last week, this week, and next week, kind of go together. So we looked at resumes last week. Obviously, we're focusing on cover letters today. And next week, we'll look at LinkedIn profiles. And collectively, they're going to have a fair amount in common. They're a sort of collection of ways to present yourself as you network and as you apply for jobs. Today's agenda, relatively straightforward, somewhat similar to last week's. We'll look at some basics. I'm going to give you a cover letter formula, which is just that. It's a way of thinking about cover letters, about structuring it, but it's obviously can be adapted. But then I also wanted to give you some different approaches. There's a lot of interesting advice out there about cover letters. I did a little search starting last week to see what people were saying. And, you know, it's worth, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but it's worth thinking outside the box sometimes with cover letters. You don't have to, and there's no one way of doing this, but wanted to give you some ideas, get you thinking a little bit more creatively. And then we'll do a little bit of practice at the end. Great, so cover letters, some basics. So a couple different ways, and I feel like over the years I've changed the focus of how I talk about things. I used to talk a lot about thinking about the cover letter as a bridge. And I would often sort of hold up the job description, hold up the resume, and then, you know, have a blank sheet in the middle, you know, or the image of a blank sheet in the middle, and think, how can you use the cover letter to frame how you want them to look at your resume to make sure that you're reflecting on it. So that's definitely one way of thinking about it. This one is the one I probably say the most often these days, is that the cover letter is a showing document. So if you remember the old writing adage, show, don't tell, the resume is the telling document. It tells who you are, where you've worked, what you did, dates, etc. Right? Some of your accomplishments, as we talked about last week. Definitely some of your skills. The cover letter is an opportunity to show you in action, show you doing the job, showing you doing the job, doing the various tasks in a way that makes you really good at it. And it can also show the why. So another way of thinking about it. And then this isn't the third point, trying to address some potential weaknesses or perceived weaknesses. This is not going to happen in every or even most cover letters, but this is a question that comes up a lot, especially in our alumni advising, is, you know, everyone's story is different, everyone's career trajectory is different, and sometimes there are things in your resume, you know, whether it's a gap or a shift or other specifics that we'll go into in a few minutes, that people want to address. And sometimes they ask if they can address it in the resume. Usually you wouldn't do it there, but the cover letter does provide this opportunity. So this certainly isn't every cover letter, but it's definitely something to think about. But let's address one of the key things out there. As soon as you Google cover letters, you're going to see plenty of articles saying, don't even bother, nobody reads them, they're obsolete, right? So posing the question. And it's absolutely true that cover letter they're not asked for as routinely as they used to be. And sometimes you're expressly told, do not submit a cover letter. And then sometimes you're asked to submit, or it's optional, but whoever it is that's reading them hates cover letters and doesn't read them. And the argument I'm going to build here today is that the number one reason I think that happens is that cover letters are boring. Most people write really stiff, formal, formulaic cover letters that basically rewrite their resume in paragraph form. And that's today what we're going to try and get away from. And so what happens is people are so used to reading boring, repetitive cover letters that a lot of people will sometimes skip altogether, sometimes they'll skim them. So similar to last week when we were talking about the 2 readings of a resume, some of the strategies we're going to talk about today are how can you get the skimmer how can you get their attention and encourage them or hook them into actually reading your whole cover letter? You may not be, and the reality is, if they read the cover letter, great. If they don't, they don't, and they're definitely going to look at your resume. So, but a couple of key things here is there are people who still value cover letters, and there's all sorts of employers out there. I personally have hired a number of people for Barnard, and I really value the cover letter. I often will look at the resume first and then look at the cover letter, but I find interesting information there. Certainly anything around writing and communication, or actually applying to be a career services person, you need to be able to, writing is important, and so that's going to be a situation where it's valued. And then just, individual hiring managers really care. So, and I think another way of thinking about it strategically is that third point, that think about it, you're getting a whole extra page to give some information about why they should want to interview you. Why would you give up that space? Why would you give away that space to either not doing it or to a boring recap of your resume? Try and use it as new strategic space to customize. Okay, I'm doing do's this week, no, not don'ts. Some of the don'ts are going to be woven through, but here's a do page. You definitely want to stick to one page. The only very rare exception to this is if the cover letter is not so much a cover letter as it is a personal statement. And I remember working with an alumna a number of years ago who was applying to be a rabbi, where they called it a cover letter, but they asked about 10 questions and wanted her to address each one of them. So that was the very rare exception to this. Otherwise, you want to stick to one page. As we mentioned last week, like the resume, the cover letter is a curated document. It is a piece of persuasive writing in which you're going to select evidence from your work history to show you doing the things that they are looking for and show you doing them well. So you want to keep it to one page, be clear, all of that. This third bullet, the mentioning the name of the company, this is a strategy that helps with the skimming. So one thing that Barnard women with their high standards don't always realize is how low sometimes the standards are in general. And I've looked at a lot of cover letters, and so many people not only don't customize them, but don't even customize them enough to mention the company at all. You know, some people will customize little and make sure they plug in the right name of the company. Some people just send the same cover letter no matter what. So, and so again, another reason why they're often skipped by people. So if you put the name of the company or organization in every paragraph, not just the first paragraph, not just the last paragraph, but in each of your, what'll probably be 4 paragraphs, somebody who's skimming will see that and say, oh, this one's customized. Let me go back and maybe this is going to be worth my time. So you get this, we talked about this last week with resumes, the keywords and short phrases from the job description. The key there is smoothly. If you can smoothly do that, absolutely, but don't go crazy about this. You know, you want to use your own language as well. And we'll talk about these stories a lot, but it's using specific examples, very short stories, things that aren't in your bullets, but it's a chance to sort of delve in a little bit and give more images, a more narrative look at what you do and how you do your work. And then I can never resist, again, from my own experience hiring people, this comes from an actual cover letter where somebody said, I would love to work at Barnard University. And we're like, no, let's get at least the name of the college right. We've had people miss the fact that it's an all-women's school, you know, things like that. So always get that final look, that fresh set of eyes before you send out a cover letter. Again, always, but specifically if you're going to be a writer or an editor or something like that, or even if attention to detail highlights is highlighted in the job description, you want to make sure you don't make any errors. So, okay. A couple of FAQs, others will come up as we go along. A lot of people get sort of anxious about who do I address this to. And I think the key here actually is in that third bullet. It's fine for it to be generic, and nowadays the sort of most common generic used rather than dear sir/madam or to whom it may concern, which can feel a little impersonal. Dear hiring manager, it's not super personal, but at least sort of recognizes that you know, you're directing it towards the person doing the hiring. And hiring manager covers kind of all eventualities. It could be somebody in HR doing the hiring. It could be the actual person who's going to hire you, who's going to manage you. So it's kind of a good generic heading, and it works fine. If they give you a name in the posting, use it. If you are 99% sure that if they mention, say, the VP for communications, and you look it up on the company website or in LinkedIn, and you're pretty sure that's the person, you could put it, but it's always a little risky because things aren't always necessarily updated. So, so if you've got the name of the person, great. If you don't worry about generic. It's not worth a ton of time trying to dig up the specific name. The name dropping thing comes from time to time. So I've sort of kept it on the FAQs. If someone told you about the job, definitely good to check in with them, and you can, as long as it's okay with them, mention them, usually in the first paragraph or the last paragraph. And then a lot of this is sort of field specific. So I know this comes up a lot in like the entertainment field, public relations, things that are very public facing. It's kind of a name droppy field. And so it's pretty common to do that. In other areas, if you have a friend of a friend who's in the business, or you once had a conversation or once met somebody, you know, use discretion on doing that. And then there's a lot of, this kind of goes back to, does anybody even read cover letters? There's a lot of questions around whether you can do it in the email. And wherever I put advice varies means that there are multiple sources out there who feel very strongly about this in opposite camps. So again, your judgment call. But if they say no cover letter, you can certainly use the email to do a quick, short, kind of what you would do in a cover letter in your email. But if it's asked for, it's helpful to attach it. And I was reading one article that made the argument that it should be in the same document as the resume, because again, that's going to encourage the person reading it to, it's easier to open one document than it is to open two. And if your cover letter is the first page of that combined document, they may scroll right on past it, but they may not. So cool. All right. And then I promised to circle back to this issue of addressing red flags. I just tried to give you a few different scenarios that come up and some possible scripts. This is not comprehensive. And if this might not sound like you, so certainly adapt it. It's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this living in a different city. This question comes up a lot where people are, living in New York, planning a move, or living in New York and open to a move. The point here is to make a definitive statement in the cover letter, even if it's not 100% true that you're going to move from New York to Chicago in early September. You could think of it along the lines of, if they give you the job, you're certainly going to move to, not certainly, there's a good likelihood you'll move to Chicago in early September. Maybe not early September 2020. It's really, it's one of the great unknowns, what's going to happen in terms of how long things will stay remote. And then of course, long-term, what the impact of all of this remote work is going to have on positions. It's definitely something that's been accelerating in recent years. And I think that my best guess is that, the COVID crisis is going to make remote work more common. So sometimes this issue of your location being a red flag, it might be less of an issue in this particular moment. It's hard to say. So, but either way, you want to address it definitively. Same thing, got the example of making a career transition and then returning after a career gap. And I think the formula here is to quickly, in a sentence or half a sentence, summarize what you have been doing and then pivoting to something positive, right? So you don't need to give the full details of why you are out of the workforce or why you're making the change. You don't need to fill in all those details. It's just, I'm noting that this is a change and I'm talking about how excited I am to see what's coming up next. So, okay. All right, so let's look at a formula. This is just one way of approaching this. And, similar to the way people don't like reading cover letters, an awful lot of you do not like writing cover letters. So if this makes it any easier, to sort of have a format which you can then deviate from, then that's sort of my goal, both when I work with people one-on-one and in workshops like this. So it's going to be a 4-paragraph letter. The first paragraph is going to be relatively short, as is the last. All right. So an easy way to do this is to start with, please accept my application. And then the overall goal of both the first paragraph and the last paragraph is to connect you to the mission or goal of the organization. And basically, it's a way to sort of demonstrate that you get what this company or this organization or this team does, and then to match your skills and experiences to that. So I think a lot of our, we're in the process of revising some of our student sample cover letters, and a lot of them have statements like, I would be the perfect fit for this position, or this position appeals to me because. It's sort of that old objective thinking. And again, there's been a shift in, it's not what the company can do for you, it's what you can do for the company. What can you bring to them that they're looking for? So that's the idea behind this. So you're sort of relatively quickly capturing what they do. You get that from their mission statement or from your overall understanding of, what the organization does, from some of the details they give you in the job description, encapsulate that, and then talk about what you can bring. So then the second and third paragraphs are going to be body paragraphs. They're going to take up more space. So visually, you're going to have short paragraph, 2 longer paragraphs, short paragraph. And one underlying theme to all of this is that the cover letter should be addressing the job description, not your resume. right? You should be, and so one simple way in this formula is to take paragraph 2 for the responsibility section from a sort of classic job description. And then when we look at paragraph 3, you'll see that we focus on the qualifications. So some of this is responding to, you know, sort of typical job description. So your sort of typical standard job description in a lot of fields just breaks it down. You know, sometimes they'll give an overview of the organization, and then they talk about the role and they say key responsibilities and then key qualifications. It's one way of doing it. It's pretty common. And so this formula kind of reflects that. Definitely something that's happened in the last 10 years is, you know, people have changed the job description, and especially new or smaller or edgier or more innovative companies are using a very different approach to this. And they're doing things like, you know, we are, and then they have 3 catchy sentences or 3 words. You are, you know, so it gets this, it's a just sort of a more direct, a little bit more creative, I guess you could say, or edgy way of doing it. So part of all of this, you know, this is kind of a formula for a fairly standard job description. If you get a non-standard job description, you want to think about responding in kind, matching your tone and the way you address things. And that's where, when we go over some of the alternatives to the standard formula, we can talk more about that. So basically, you hone in on the responsibilities, you look at what's important to them, what seems to be important to them, what do they lead with, what do they keep repeating, and then if you've got what's important to them, then think about what's a good match for you. You know, where can you tell a good story, give a good example that aligns with what they're looking for. And so then you go with topic sentences. So in a lot of cover letters, people draw the topic sentence from the resume and say, you know, as a history major at Barnard College, I learned to research and write effectively. All this is doing is flipping it and leaving out the as a history major at Barnard College or as project manager at Planned Parenthood or whatever that resume-based topic sentence is. Ditch that and instead just focus in on the topic sentence that comes from the job description. I had an example in here. Maybe it's in the. I think it's in the next slide of how to do that. So this is it's sort of a quick and easy fix, and it's one of the first edits I often make when I look at a cover letter is to have that skill-based or experience-based topic sentence. All right, and then you're going to give a specific example, a story, not a rewritten bullet, but something with a little bit more detail, a little bit more vivid language or imagery. Okay. Third paragraph. Now we're looking at qualifications. Here's where I gave an example of a topic sentence. So here, I'm going to assume if I read that somewhere in the job description, it said, we need someone who can manage multiple projects. We need someone who can meet tight deadlines. So whoever's writing this cover letter determined those things are important. They kind of go together. So I'm going to put them together. I'm going to write a paragraph about this. And then I'm going to give a couple of examples of doing exactly that, you know, managing multiple projects, meeting tight deadlines, etc. The qualification section in general is a good place to focus. Qualifications often, I mean, sometimes there's the very specific qualifications, you know, must have certificate in X or must have advanced knowledge of Excel. It could have those very specific qualifications, but often these sections in a job description address some of the softer skills, team player, collaborative, good communicator, things like that. And that's where, that's why I make that final point that these are often the kind of qualities, I often call them good worker qualities that transfer from one job to another, different jobs, different fields, etc. So we're going to take a little pause from the formula to talk a little bit. I've mentioned stories a couple times. So I just want to give you some ideas on that. So this is often when I'm working with somebody on a cover letter, I'll just ask these questions or ask them to think about these. I think my favorite is probably the third one. I call it the epiphany question, but I tried to take the religious language out of a PowerPoint. It's looking for, when did you figure out something important and trying to tell that story? but any of these work. You're just trying to sort of prompt your memory on some of the times you did these different things, and can you use that to illustrate, again, you in action. You're trying to tell a story or give an example, a specific example that shows you in action doing the work that this place would like you to do for them. Okay. And so then let's get to our fourth paragraph. Oh, I was doing so well on the cursor thing, and now it's sticking again. Right. Okay. So final paragraph. Very similar to the, it's this, as I said, same goal as the first. You're trying to connect yourself to their mission, their overall goal of the organization. So you're basically rewriting what you wrote in the first, or focusing on a new thing, using some fresh language. And then the final sentence is often something along this lines, basically what you want to hope for next. But the subtext always is, you're going to want to talk to me. That's what you're trying to say in this final paragraph. You can say that more casually, etc. Okay, so let's mix it up a little bit. I sort of, as I told you, I did, my annual research on the topic, sort of see what's being said out there in the world of career advice. And in some cases, I was looking for some specific things that I had heard of before, or people had brought to my attention before. And so I collected a couple different things to get us to think outside the box. Okay, so first up, there's a lot of people who advocate, and I was at a conference where there was a panel of recruiters who talked about this, that they like it when people open with a story. So I found this article. I think Lacey's going to put the link possibly in the chat section. You can see that the topic down at that bottom is how to write a cover letter that doesn't just recap your resume. So they gave these 4 examples. I thought they were interesting. I almost left out the third one because it's so salesy, but I don't, even though we don't have a ton of Barnard women in sales, there's a lot and they're successful. So I threw it in there. So there's just a few examples. With the link, you could either cut and paste it yourself, before the webinar ends, or you could quickly go there, and that way you have the window open. If you want to see the larger articles that this came from and some of the other examples. So I think this is an interesting alternative, and I think I've seen this work really well when an alum has a particular connection to a company or organization. So it could be that their work has impacted you in some way. It could be that you are a consumer of that, good. It could just be a company that's been on your radar for a long time, or you've been a reader, if it's media, so it often, you can use that as an anecdote, but these are some other examples of, just striking this more storytelling narrative stance from the beginning. The human brain is wired for stories. It's why, for instance, so many journalism articles, start with the individual story as the hook, and then, pull out to the broader point that's being made. So it's definitely something to think about experimenting with. It's based on the theory, again, that people find cover letters boring. And so if your first paragraph right away disrupts that boring, that boring assumption, that you can often pull them into reading it. Another possibility, another thinking outside the box, is something called the T format cover letter. And then the article that Lacey's going to link to in a minute also refers to it as a specific needs cover letter. This is an interesting one. I'll show you. I couldn't fit both the image and the info in the same slide, so we'll get to it in a second. This one popped up, I want to say, about 8 to 10 years ago. I don't think it's caught on in a really wide way, but I definitely Googled to make sure people don't hate it. And there doesn't seem to be any article out there saying, don't do this. So I think on the one hand, you could say, because it's not so common, it could have impact. And I definitely have anecdotal evidence of alumni, and actually a couple of friends who've used it. And it's a distinctive format. And it also very specifically sets out to match you to the job description. So sometimes it could be effective. So definitely something to think about. And here's what it looks like. again, I pulled this from a specific article. I forgot to put the annotation there, but it's in the link that Lacey is sharing. So it's called a T format. I don't actually know why, but I think they call it a T format because the image got stretched out here a little, but you have a little bit at the top, a little bit at the bottom, and then this column in the middle that is theoretically narrower. So I don't know. I don't think it's the greatest name for it, but it seems to be the most common name for this style. So the idea is you do that brief introduction and conclusion, but in the middle, instead of the two body paragraphs, you instead have two columns or a table. Sometimes people do bullet lists, and you're basically taking, you know, in this case, 4 points, could be 3 to 5 points from the job description using their exact language, and then how do you match up with that? So it's fairly straightforward. It is a different format, so it can catch people's eye for that reason, and it can be, you know, for a certain type of reader, it's an interesting way of putting it out. I always feel like you're wasting a fair amount of space on the left to just sort of re-put out what they're looking for. But on the other hand, I do think the strength of it is it really matches up and says, you want this, I've got this. You want that, I've got that. And so I like it for that reason. So again, something to think about experimenting with. Right. Sorry, a little bit of cursor. Okay. And then I pulled the last one from Ask a Manager, the blog that I referenced last time. She frequently posts, not frequently, but every once in a while she'll post a cover letter with permission from someone. And I titled the slide this for a particular reason. This is one person's, you know, narrative voice that really captures who she is. This is not you, and it's not about imitating this voice. It's about finding your voice, your personality, and how can you convey it. I'm gonna give you a second to take a quick look at it. And Allison Green, who runs the Ask a Manager, her particular thing she does with cover letters and resumes and examples is she draws from fiction to, you know, change the identity. So this is a real cover letter that resulted in a real job offer. So I'll be quiet for a minute. Take a look. So one of the things that happens at the blog is, because it's a blog and there's commenters, there is often a lively debate after she posts something like this, and people say, I hate this, I would never do this, my field would hate this, you know. So there's always that, but you know, and again, nobody's saying that you have to do it this way, but I think it's interesting to look, first of all, at this overall point is that there's a lot of personality that comes through in this, and it's a story, you know, it keeps that narrative. Other than that first sentence, please find attached, you know, it basically tells a story throughout. And woven into that story are bits and pieces about her past, and very much the why, and then also, you know, her specific strengths, specific skill set she brings to this. I like it for two other reasons. I wanted to point out that she addresses two potential red flags, which is she's been out of the workforce. I think in the case of this, she was out for 12 years. So she addresses that potential red flag. I think that, you know, how big a red flag is a gap? And I think that it's gotten, I think employers in general are more comfortable with people coming back from a gap, whether it's for, you know, caretaking of children or parents or other people, or some other reason why you've been out. But it still does come up, and people will often ask about it, especially in an interview situation. So this is an example of, let me get this up front. But the other red flag, and this comes up a lot too, is that, you know, she has a master's degree and she did teach at the college level, and and so often the red flag in that case is, why would you want to be an assistant if you could be a professor? And we all know there's all sorts of answers to that, but again, you know, you never know who's going to read this and what their take is. And so she addresses that red flag as well. You know, I want to be in a college setting. I liked teaching, but what I really like is, you know, being an assistant. So, yeah. Okay, so those are some, just some examples, as I said, of thinking a little bit outside the traditional, oh, sorry, I have one more, I forgot. The 3-sentence cover letter. This one actually was drawn to my attention by a young alum who read this article. It's from the Harvard Business Review, I believe. The link is down there, and Lindsay will share it as well. But the main thing here is, let's boil it down. So take a quick look. So if you do link to the larger article, it is entitled "The Best Cover Letter I Ever Received." And basically the author talks about why he liked us so much, mostly because it was incredibly short. So the brevity is the real attention grabber here. And then that middle section, that middle sentence, you know, just without going into all the details in the stories and some of the other things I've been recommending, it just hones right in on, these seem to be the key things you're looking for. I've got them. Take a look at my resume for the details. Boom. I should mention, if you don't read the article, the context of this is I believe he was referred to the job, which is why it's, I wouldn't really phrase the, which I believe may report to you. It sounds a little hesitant there, but it's a real letter from a particular moment. So again, all of these you want to take with a grain of salt. Nobody's saying that you would do exactly this, but it's just food for thought and thinking about how you can mix things up a little. So let's just take a quick minute. I want to leave time for questions. Let's take a couple minutes, and I want you to do one of two things. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so on your own to think or write it down, and then invite as many of you who want to share it in the chat. Try that. Try the 3-sentence. Try the 3-sentence cover letter. That's one option, and especially that middle sentence, right? How could you encapsulate in a single sentence what you would bring to a job? And just kind of imagine a job or think about a job you've applied to or seen recently. How would you do that? How would you write a single sentence that does it? And then if you prefer not to do that, the other thing you could do and share with us is just tell us one of those quick stories I've been referencing. Give us a quick example or a quick story that shows you in action doing what you do best. So I'll stop talking, give you a second to think about that, and then share. Okay, so any of you who are willing to share either your one sentence, the middle sentence from your 3-sentence cover letter, or a quick story or example from your professional experience that shows you being you and doing what you do best. I'll look at those in a minute. I'm going to stick here with the screen sharing for just a moment to wrap things up, and then before we head into Q&A, I'll take a look at some of what you shared. Perfect. Okay. Next steps, this should look familiar. Coming up next week, LinkedIn profile, and then we'll stay on the LinkedIn topic, at least in part, to talk about networking. And then we'll look at interviewing and then negotiating the job offer. And finally, we'll take a look at managing your ongoing professional development once you're in the new job. So it's a very positive, the narrative of this webinar series is very positive. You will get an interview, you will get a job offer, and you will start the job and be looking ahead to your ongoing professional development. No guarantees, but we try and keep that positive, optimistic outlook. And again, reiterating information. Some of you have already taken advantage of this. I've had a couple of appointments pop up, got a nice compliment from an alum that I spoke with this week for Eric on my team, Beyond Barnard. He's one of the people behind the Beyond Barnard at Barnard EDU who can help you if you're having any issues setting up Handshake. And then Claire is the other person who fields a lot of those questions, and they're both there ready to help you with any issues. So definitely take advantage. If you navigate it all fine on your own, good as well. All right, so thank you so much for your attention, your engagement. I'm going to stop screen sharing and take a look at what some of you shared in the chat. And hey. All right, a couple questions about the attendance sheet. It's just the key thing is Zoom makes it really hard to track who came, and so this external sheet is just it just makes it easier for us to capture who actually arrived and keep accurate numbers. So if you only include your first name and last initial, that's probably enough for us to find you on the registration list and mark you as present. Amy suggests whether T is for table. That's also a possibility. It wasn't in the article I read, but that's another possibility. Oh, and Lynn agrees. T chart. Okay, I might be misinformed. I'm happy to have those theories. So, great. Okay. So here's a couple of one sentences. I guess you can all see these, but as a senior content strategist with years of expertise in writing and marketing, I can bring the divide between UX and content easily. Oh, I like that. I like the sort of nod to what you've done, like how you've gotten there and then what you do. I believe that my 5 years of diverse hospitality training, relationship management, expertise, and sales will be valuable for. Excellent. All right, also a good one. I'm an engaged and adaptable communicator with highly advanced research and analytical skills, an enthusiastic team member, and a curious quick learner. Nice, you guys are good at this. Yep, and you've got some numbers with thousands of news stories, celebrity profiles, business features. I now find myself back on the market thanks to the COVID pandemic. I like that. Bubbly TV enthusiast. I'm drawn to. Good. These are all good. You guys. Sometimes I think it's not a bad place to start. Even if you don't end up sending a 3-sentence cover letter, the exercise of boiling it down can be helpful. It can be helpful in terms of, interpreting that job description and then encapsulating your experience. And you might adapt, you might adapt some of it to your introduction or to one of your other paragraphs, where you might decide to try the 3-sentence one. Yeah, most of them are, people are saying they can't see all of them. So most of them say all panelists and attendees. So maybe there's some technical hitch. If we can capture them before we sign off, maybe either Lacey or I could do a cut and paste, so then we could share them with you. And yeah, we'll experiment with some other formats as well. All right, let's go to, I see about 10 questions waiting in the queue. It's 1:45. I'm gonna promise my bosses I would try and make the staff meeting that starts at 2 for 1. So let's see if we can zoom through some questions and go from there. If something is a big reach, but also a good fit, is it okay to acknowledge that by saying something like, I may not at first appear to be the ideal candidate, but take a closer look and you'll find blah, blah, blah. I like that in spirit. I wouldn't phrase it exactly that way, because you want to be careful not to, in addressing red flags, you want to be careful that you're not directing too much attention to the red flag. So I kind of like the style that came up in one of the one of the opening anecdote examples on that slide about, you may not see, the word community manager does not come up in my resume, but I've been bringing people together. So maybe something like that. Instead of saying I may not appear to be the ideal candidate, yeah, I feel like that's got a slightly negative cast to it, but I like the idea of addressing, fit. So maybe dig a little deeper into the positive, like what is it that you bring that you think is going to make you a good fit, even if it's not the obvious fit. So if you're not already going to speak on this, what is your opinion of T-form cover letters where JD requirements are matched? Yeah, so mixed opinion. I think it's definitely worth trying. I've heard enough stories of people getting a positive response to that I think it's worth a shot. And one thing you can do, especially if you're applying to a lot of things, is you can mix it up a little. You know, you can run your own experiment. And if you use a traditional format for some things and a non-traditional format for others, and if you see, I mean, it's not going to be a super rigorous scientific sample, but if you do see that you get more traction, more response from the alternative methods, then, you know, that might help you. So. Oh, and she's in tech. That's interesting. Yeah, I think the article mentioned that those letters, yeah, tech is one of the areas that's famous for saying they don't read cover letters. So I would say if you're going to include a cover letter, it would be good to experiment. And I do think that very focused, tech resumes are like that too, that very strategic focused, I'm going to tell you just what you need to know and I'm going to put it right up front. So I think you could use that similar style on a cover letter. So a difference between paragraph 2 and 3, they are very similar. Basically, you're just using 2 different paragraphs to show 2 different sets of skills or experiences that you want to focus in. So you're looking at that job description and you're saying, I'll be simplistic here. You're saying, oh, well, they seem to really, they want some certain technical skills and quantitative skills, but they also seem to want more qualitative skills, good with people, something like that. So it's basically just you're just sort of separating them out and saying, using one paragraph to talk about one set of skills and experiences and one paragraph to talk about another set. So they are very similar. The stories will be different. The examples will be different. And I specifically did, in that particular formula, said to draw from job responsibilities for paragraph 2 and job qualifications for paragraph 3, but you absolutely don't have to do it. You could split it up a different way. Let's see, with the T format cover letter, this example seems to be focusing on tasky type things that could be on the resume. Is this the best way to go, or should we, oops, sorry, things are just jumping. Or should we use a specific story example for what I bring to the table? Yeah, I noticed that too, and I didn't leave myself enough time to sort of rewrite my own version of it. But I would definitely think it is, that particular example of the T format is sort of a good example of the bridge concept I was talking about at the beginning, where it's like, and they are literally taking, here's from the job description, here's from my resume, let me put the 2 side by side. So you could do that. But I think you also could do what you ask, which is to, instead of doing that very task-focused right column, you could use stories instead and use those stories and those more vivid examples. So I think there's a little leeway there. I didn't realize that being overqualified because of a master could be a negative. Do you think it's always necessary to acknowledge it? No, that's very specific. I think it goes, it's less than do you have a master's or an advanced degree, to the general issue of being overqualified or switching gears. You know, they're just, potential employers and people who are reading resumes tend to be very sort of black and white about it. It's like, here's what I'm looking for. He or she doesn't fit into it, move them off the pile, right? And so what you're trying to do is, in some specific cases, address that. So I think in this specific sample, where you've got someone who's clearly well-educated, clearly has an academic background, but is not seeking an academic job, she's seeking an administrative job that some people might think she's overqualified for. She's decided to address that with it. But I think that's a very specific thing. And again, you have to be careful with the red flag issue. And that's definitely worth, you know, it's usually worth a conversation, you know, whether it's with myself and an advisor or, you know, one of your other trusted people that you go to on work stuff, to just sort of talk that through. Because again, you don't want to jump the gun and call attention to something or dwell on something that they otherwise wouldn't worry about that much. So, yeah. So to answer your question, it's not always necessary to acknowledge it. I set up a handshake profile on Barnard site. If you can make only one account, would it be better to cancel the account on Barnard and set up one through my law school? I would say yes. If you are specifically looking for law-related jobs, you're probably going to get better, more focused, you know, you're going to, because Handshake works, you can apply to positions through Handshake, and so and you also can be recruited through Handshake. So I feel like yes, if your law school uses Handshake and you are looking for jobs in law, it probably would be better. But I do I feel like this is an ongoing discussion with folks on my team. I think there may actually be a way to have 2 separate handshakes, but I'm going to have to circle back and make sure I'm right on that. So if you have to make the choice, I would stick with law school. And then if I find out, I'm just going to jot your name down, Jacqueline, so that I remember. Law school handshake versus Barnard handshake. And I just want to get your name so I can circle back to you. Handshake, it's a just to clarify, some people were confused. It's a platform, it's a company, it's a platform that then gets customized to schools. So, and it's ever evolving. So, and I'm not always the most up-to-date person on what you can and can't do there, but I'll circle back. If you're using the traditional resume format, is it okay if it's less than 1 page? The resume? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, a 1-page resume is always fine. What we talked about last week is that you can go to the 2nd page if you've got enough relevant experience, you know, to include. So, but yeah, it's fine. I mean, if you're using traditional resume, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if you meant resume or cover letter. I'll answer both. Resume, I mean, you want to, if it's less than 1 page, if it looks really skimpy, we should probably talk, you know, myself or somebody else on our team, and talk about how we could flesh it out a little bit, make it look a little more substantive. Cover letter, as we talked about today, it can be super short, you know, all on 1 page, or it can be, you know, four paragraphs that fill up most of the page. So I think with cover letter, it's okay if it appears short. With resume, you want to be careful if it looks too skimpy on the page. So how do I address the red flag of lack of experience but having an advanced degree? Should this even be addressed? Yeah, that's an interesting one. Barnard has a number of 4+1 pathways that allow students to go straight from undergrad into, basically end up doing, and there's 4+1, and then there's a couple of joint degree programs that some of you may be familiar with, where you basically end up with a master's at the end of 5 or 6 years, and that sometimes can lead to where you've got the advanced degree but not a ton of experience. I think that's definitely something that comes up. I wouldn't necessarily address it directly. Indirectly, I think one of the things you can talk about is, both on your resume and in your cover letter, is the practical experience that you got. So whether that's internships, or if as part of your grad program you did whatever they call it, a practicum, a clinic, whatever the specific term is at a specific graduate program, to hone in on that as work experience, and again, hone in on these specific skills, specific experiences that the place is looking for. So I'd say you can indirectly address it, but I wouldn't call a bunch of attention to it. So can you explain a little more about moving past the "why you are perfect for a role" approach to a cover letter? In the 3-sentence cover letter, the person took that approach. So I'm just curious about that. Yeah, it's interesting. In that 3-sentence version, I don't love the, I don't love exactly that. Like, I'd be perfect for this. It's not so much that, yeah, I'd say it's sort of a slight change in tone or language. What you want to be talking about, less about being perfect for the role or the most qualified candidate, all those sort of superlatives, and talk more about fit. Think about it more as a persuasive writing, in which basically the argument you're making is, I'm a really good fit for this. I fit what you're looking for because I've done X, Y, and Z in the past. So you don't have to avoid that language altogether. And especially if it's in your intro or conclusion, it's probably going to get kind of glazed, you know, sort of skimmed over. But I think using perfect fit, I'd probably ditch the perfect and just say good fit, strong fit, excellent fit, and focus on that idea. I match what you're looking for. Here's some examples so you can see how I match. If you applied for and were offered the position 5 years ago and now are job hunting again, should you mention the previous application? Interesting. Generally, yes, but the 5 years gives me some pause. I'd say if it's a big place, and if you have any recollection whether it was an online application, you know, where, you know, you were uploading things, but if you've got a good memory, you remember, or even have it in your files, who you know, what the position was, who you applied to, it can't hurt, you know. I mean, you could certainly, I wouldn't dwell on it, but you could work in the fact that, you know, a position at this organization caught my eye 5 years ago and it's catching my eye again, you know, and then use that as sort of further proof of the fact that this place is interesting and compelling to you. So I don't think you should necessarily mention it, but you could. So if it were more recent than 5 years ago, it's often good to address that and just, you know, you don't need to defend it anyway. Just sort of, if you've applied for something in the more recent past, it's definitely good to give that heads up. So any thoughts on using bullet points for middle paragraphs, like starting in the first paragraph with, I'd like to highlight some of my professional experience? Excellent. Yeah, there's actually a couple of variations. I think in that same article that talks about the T format, there's a variation like this, which is using those. And again, visually, I think that can be striking and appealing to a lot of people is, you know, short intro, short conclusion, and then bullet, bullet, bullet. So that's one way to go. And another version I saw was paragraph form, but the paragraph started with a bolded short phrase from the job description or a sort of key quality, and then the you know, so it's basically like the T thing, but instead of doing left and right in a table or a column, it was, here's what you're looking for in bold, and then here's the rest of the paragraph showing how I've got that. So yeah, I think any of those sort of formatting ways to make that middle sort of visually striking and clear are worth a try. We've got a suggestion regarding red flags. If there is no cover letter, then I have put a footnote in my resume. Oh, that's interesting. As in, I could, interesting. I would love to get more information on that. And, you know, feel free to, if you want to send me an example of where you've done that, I could try and incorporate that into some of our communications with you all, or maybe even to the next session. So yeah, yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting thought. I just would want to see how you actually executed it before I said yes. Are non-traditional cover letters only successful in newer companies, or have they worked in traditional companies, public sector? I would say I'd go for it. I'd go for non-traditional in traditional companies, public sectors. I think the outlier here is law, especially big law. They do not like, they don't like, I'm making a generalization, but generally speaking, law in particular seems to not like non-traditional cover letters. They tend to veer towards that more businessy, professional, formal type of writing. I think almost anywhere else, I think mixing it up a little. And, you know, some of this you're not, you know, some of the things we've been talking about, like the T format and the bullet points we were just talking about, it's just a different way of arranging the information. You can still be fairly formal and pretty direct, you know, in your, in doing it. But I do think the narrative quality, that more personal, that sort of warmer, more personal narrative form, it's different. And it's a way, if it's well written, it's a way of conveying you in a way that other people are trying to do in more boring language. So I would say to give it a try, no matter how traditional the company or the field is, and see, you know, like I said, it can really, if it works, it can get you into that, into the interview queue, which is good. But if you're feeling nervous about it, if you want to try one of these, you know, less traditional things, actually, our preferred mode of advising for both resumes and cover letters is if you share the job description with us and share your draft, either of your resume or your cover letter or both, and we look at it in that context. And so if you had any question, if you're feeling nervous about something that you tried that was a little non-traditional, we're happy to, you know, sort of take a look at that and give you our 2 cents. That's what we're here for. Oh, a few more. I'm going to be late to my staff meeting yet again, but let me quickly answer a few more. Is it important to use keywords from job description in your cover letter? It's helpful. Don't go crazy. People get a little nutty about this. But yeah, if you used one term and they used another term and you can substitute their term for your term, go for it. As long as it's smooth and as long as you're not taking huge chunks of their job description and plunking it into the cover letter. The exception would be in that T format we were talking about, where that's kind of built into the system. Business school handshake versus Barnard when looking for an encore or transitioning after a long career in banking. That's interesting, because if you're not looking for businessy type roles, you might want to use Barnard. I don't know. I feel like the other thing is, the other part in your question is after a long career in banking. It's true. Handshake definitely is going to have more opportunities for current students and recent grads. There are definitely some alumni or more experienced higher postings in there, but it's not going to be the overwhelming majority. So I'm sort of mixed on this, but I feel like if you have to choose, might go with business school. You're going to get a lot of traditional, I don't know, business school's changing. So yeah, I don't know, there could be some interesting opportunities out there. So I'm leaning towards business school for Handshake for You. But we can talk about it further if you want. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to sort of dwell on it more. Okay, will you post the slide somewhere? Yeah, so what's happening is every time you get, if you're on the registration list, you should be getting an email the morning. So you'll get an email next Wednesday morning, and it will have a link to this week's slides and also this week's webinar. So there's definitely a slight delay. If we got an email from someone ahead of time who was writing a cover letter right now and wanted a copy of the slides. So I think Lacey was going to send them to you. So if it's time sensitive, definitely let us know and we can get a copy to you earlier. But otherwise they're going up exactly a week after. So if you need today, shoot me an email and I'll get you a copy. So it's cshin@barnard.edu. I'm about to head into 3 straight meetings, so it's probably going to be the end of the day before I get it to you. Lacey might be able to get it to you faster. So it's cshin@barnard.edu or lbeck, Lacey Beck, B-E-C-K. So LBECK @barnard.edu, and one of us should be able to get it to you. Okay. Awesome. All right, I'm going to end it there, and we will try and scroll back, make sure we didn't miss anything in either the comments or the chat. But good luck to you all. Have some fun playing around with your cover letter style, and we'll see some of you again next week. And take good care, as always.